So hello everyone, and thanks very much for joining us today for this RewirEd Talk. So ahead of the RewirEd Summit in Dubai this December, the RewirEd Talk series is helping to catalyse a global conversation on how education and learning need to be reshaped to address the current challenges. And today our talk will explore what we need to consider so that technology can play its most effective role in education reform. We're told that technology provides almost infinite possibilities to transform education, but how do we channel this huge potential into tangibly improved outcomes for people and communities around the world? According to UNICEF, 94% of ministries of education developed policies to provide at least one form of digital or broadcast learning during COVID-19. And that is an absolute explosion in use of education technology, which was already growing quickly prior to the pandemic. However, UNICEF also estimates that at least 31% of students couldn't be reached by these efforts, and researchers from Cambridge and RTI have calculated that school closures may have wiped out a year of academic progress for disadvantaged students in the global south. So we can't rely on increased proliferation of technology alone to ensure quality education for all. And to delve more into these considerations, I'm delighted to be able to moderate this discussion today with our expert panel. I'm Jane Mann, I'm the Managing Director of the Cambridge Partnership for Education, and we are a part of the University of Cambridge that works with governments and partners around the world on programmes of reform to help transform societies through education. And I'm joined today by Dr. Anissa Moini, who is Chief Impact Officer for Education Technology Research Accelerator Educate Ventures at UCL, and also founder of Gold Star Education. I'm also joined by Zubair Jum Jr., who is founder of online learning platform ZNotes and a member of the Digital Education Futures Initiative, DEFI, at Cambridge, the advisory board there. And also Basil Ayas, who is Regional Sales Lead at Google Cloud for the education and healthcare sectors in the Middle East, Turkey and Africa. So this panel not only has extensive education technology expertise, but between them they also have experience in entrepreneurship, in innovation and in social impact. So it's a really exciting group to be able to discuss these issues with. So welcome to my panel and let's get started. So my first question I'm going to direct to you, Anissa. As new technology evolves and AI becomes the norm, how do you see the role of education reform shifting?
So at Educate, we like to think of three major impacts that AI is going to have on education. So the first category we say is all about using AI to solve our current educational challenges. So how do we choose the right tools to solve our problems today? The second category we think about is educating people about AI, which is all about AI readiness and how do we get people there to understand how AI works. And actually, we've developed an AI readiness course in order to do that, which is a part of our will be a part of our acceleration program this year. And then the third one is about changing education as it is right now to enable everyone to develop the skills they need in order to be effective and happy in the new AI augmented workplace and world. So how do we prepare for the skills for this new AI world? And education reform, I think, will really need to do much more by way of becoming data savvy at the reform level and technology savvy first, both in terms of understanding the benefits and the risks of AI. So those who are involved at the policymaking level will need to be to make sure that they're AI ready themselves, basically, before they can ensure that all the schools are enabled to become AI ready as well. And so that they can make sure to manage and leverage that data to make the best decisions about AI products and services and to meet their goals. And so I think that a big part of that understanding and becoming AI ready is about understanding the ethical challenges involved in AI, and all of that will likely be front of mind in education reform. And we'll need to ensure that the right guidance and training is provided to all those working within education to understand those ethical challenges as well. And so the role for education reform will actually be increasingly innovative and determined to reap the best possible, in order to reap the best possible benefits from technology such as AI.
Thanks very much, Anissa. So Zubair, the same sort of things that you're finding from DEFI and from your own work?
Of course, I'm just going to be really building on what Anissa said, and she's touched upon many of the really critical points anyway. But I think the first point to realize is that, as with any fad, we see AI now being plastered across pretty much any educational tool you see out there, right? And being a scientific programmer, I can tell you very, very honestly that to say that you're AI powered is very easy. I can literally put a few lines of code in a program and suddenly be calling myself an AI powered tool. So there's a layer to kind of explore and critically kind of review what sort of tools we're actually assigning this kind of AI type of almost label towards. And as Anissa said, the people at the top who are making these decisions for how education reform will be taking place at a governmental or a national or regional level need to have the expert knowledge to be able to determine this, because it is really easy to be scammed by these exploitative tools that are existing in the market right now. I want to dive in a little bit more on the kind of the challenges that AI faces. And Anissa mentioned ethics. Of course, that is such an important consideration, not because of the novelty and the kind of continuous changes which happen in this field. It is really difficult to have very set levels of policy and understanding of what should be the legal or policy methods of determining how things should be working. So we need to be educational reformists, and those leading these reforms need to be at the cutting edge of understanding where technology has reached and how those changes can be implemented or should be restricted. Another point which I've actually realized very recently as part of a focus group at the Ada Lovelace Institute was representation and data representation. Of course, AI leverages large scales of data to be able to inform decisions, and yet how are we making sure that that data is representative and actually making democratic decisions? Let's look at an example of, for example, essay marking. There's only a certain number of sample data that can be input. Are we making sure that all user bases or all user groups are being represented, the different language types, the different cultural stories that are being added to these things? So there's a huge piece to kind of start considering these like little nuances which make a huge difference when we come to an education reform at a high level. The final piece I want to touch upon, and sorry for extending this answer, but it's around the fact that where is AI being implemented? So we already have lots of tools that are quickly evolving and improving, possibly targeting only certain sectors or user groups of the educational system, and oftentimes the ones which are already well provided for. So we see international education systems which are getting more and more tools being developed and implemented for them. However, how do we make sure that this tool, this AI that is so incredibly able to make personalized and innovative ways of learning available to everyone, how can we make sure that it's accessible to everyone? So there needs to be careful consideration of how we almost augment and propagate the direction of what AI takes. So there's a lot to consider, and I think the kind of the overarching theme over here is that reformists have to have high levels of expertise in this field to be able to make the right decisions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Zubair. Both of you have thrown up there some really important considerations around challenges, but also opportunities that are presented by technology in this space. I wanted to ask you, Basil, if you could share some examples of any innovative projects or partnerships that you think reflect those challenges and opportunities presented by technology in this space.
Absolutely, and I love what was said, because AI is going through the cycle, and today it's the buzzword, and everybody wants a piece of it. And I feel with my work with a lot of ministries for educations, the ministries sometimes put a lot of pressure, and they believe that technology alone can solve their problems. And I just want to make clear, AI is there, it's going to help accelerate education reform, but I really don't think alone technology can improve education. It can be a powerful part of the solution, absolutely. It can accelerate it, absolutely. But alone, we really need to come together with the users, with the teachers, with the ministries, the policymakers, and in partnerships to really address that. And I'll give you a great example. We at Google, we partnered with Cambridge Partnership for Education and the Ministry of Education in the Sultanate of Oman out here in the Middle East. When COVID hit, they had 500,000 students in their public schooling system in grade 5 to 12 that were suddenly not allowed to go to school. And those students were not equipped with the devices, the internet connectivity, any sort of access to e-learning. And the teachers, moreover, did not have that tool. So we came together, and the project was a proof of concept, and the code name was Foulage. And I love the code name because it refers back to an ancient irrigation system that existed back in 500 AD, so more than 1,500 years ago. As you can imagine, in the Sultanate of Oman, water sources are rare, and once a water source is found, they dug these channels in the earth to distribute the water using gravity as far as possible across the Sultanate to get water to the farmland. So using that analogy of how can we get this source of data, this great content that Cambridge provides to the ministry that up until then has been quite static, right? It was in PDF format, we had ebooks, we had workbooks, and that was fine because teachers will read it, teachers will print it out, and assignments will be distributed to the students, and they'll fill them out manually, and it'll be graded manually, and hunky-dory, everybody was happy. That doesn't work when you are doing hybrid, and initially when we were doing 100% remote learning. So we came together, we used elements of design thinking, we conducted multiple workshops. The project was organized over 12 weeks in 4 stages. And we asked the ministry to select their top teacher innovators. So it's very user-centric. We went out with the research and analysis of how today we are using the content that has been provided to be delivered in a traditional manner. How are we going to use it? Because within 4 weeks, we were up and running. We had 500,000 students on Google Workspace, logging in remotely using Google Meet. But how were the teachers coping with using content that was more built for a more traditional approach in an e-learning way? We did 3 workshops. It was very difficult to get the teachers to share. What we discovered early on is that there wasn't a baseline. Some users were a lot more comfortable digitizing in their mind the learning content, where others weren't. So multiple workshops, lots of research. We came out with some innovative ideas. And at the end, we're currently in the 4th and last stage where we're testing out the ability to centralize all content, make it easily accessible by all professors and teachers across the country, labeling it to make it easy for search, as well as sharing some of that digital expertise. How can you use whiteboards in a Google Meet and connect it to Google Drive for your storage? How can you sort of use Google Forms to do some quizzes that Cambridge has provided in the workbook of the student? So lots of innovation there, very well received by the innovator teachers, and it was a teach-trainer model where those teachers are now, along with the supervisor from the ministry, taking it out to the whole country. So that's our project. It's still in progress, but I just want to clearly, focus on the fact that if it wasn't for the partnership between the content providers, Cambridge, between the tech providers, Google, between the policy writers, the ministry, and the users, the teachers, then this project would not have been able to kick off. The students, you mentioned 31% lack access to tech after COVID. We had 500,000 and they all graduated last year. And now we've expanded the project to grades 1 through 4. So we're now talking about 1 million students online getting educated through this innovative approach.
Thanks, Basil. And I love that imagery of the irrigation system as well. Zubair, have you got any examples of projects or partnerships, or a view on the role of partnerships in delivering projects like this?
Absolutely, and once again, I'm just building on the great insights that the fellow panelists are sharing. It is definitely a multi-stakeholder problem when we consider developing educational systems and reforms, essentially. And I love what Basil said, because there is, yes, we have technology and AI and all that great stuff, but that on its own is not going to change how education works. And the final stakeholder I'd like to bring into this discussion, which I think Anissa will have more insights to share as a doctorate, are the researchers, is academia, essentially. And I would say that innovation in technology is one part of it, but innovation in pedagogy is almost as important, or if not more important, when considering how to really reform and radically change how education works in the future. So it's the marriage of these two things coming together, the researchers and the technologists, that actually makes these huge and incredible solutions. And to just build on that a little bit more, is oftentimes we have the developers or the technologists who have obviously very great expertise in a very certain and small, narrow domain. You know, when you get to become someone who can leverage and develop AI and machine learning tools, you need to go really far, but there is often not enough scope to be able to kind of really understand the educational nuances, the theory of knowledge behind it, all these kind of very intricate and research-oriented pieces. And on the other end, we have amazing researchers who are coming up with the greatest ideas, and they might not have the technological expertise, or they might not have the people to test this with, because they are creating these amazing frameworks, but they live in articles and journals, and that's where they kind of exist. And that's the kind of, and where DEFI comes in, I guess, in my hat of DEFI, is that marriage and that kind of partnership that comes together when technologists are able to leverage cutting edge educational research and implementing it and testing it. And I think if we are able to do this more and more, we can really see us transitioning to a world where it's not simply let's take an existing system of how traditional learning was happening and then just automate pieces and make it a little bit easier. But instead, how can we really leverage this new technology, this new tools, these incredible leaps in, let's say, AR and VR. Let's look at all these very, very cool new pieces of technology that are coming in and actually implementing it in a very novel way in our education system. So partnerships is critical, and I think the Fellows Project was really a very good example of it. And I hope that we can see more of it, because this is how we'll move forward. Not just the University of Cambridge, but across the world, education ministries should have really strong relationships with academia to make those kind of processes and make those innovations happen.
Thanks, Zubair. And those bridges that you're describing there, that DEFI is aiming to build, are really powerful. I've got a question for Anissa now. Anissa, what do you think are the biggest challenges of implementing large-scale technology projects at national level in education reform programs?
So, Jane, hands down, the biggest challenge is educational expertise and capacity. So teachers need to understand how to gain the most benefits from technology, and at the moment they do not. And there's a need to make time and space for them to be able to do that. So there's a need for comprehensive programs to address that capacity building, that expertise building, and programs that are set by policymakers with an understanding of what it takes to build those skill sets. And so there, at Educate, actually, we have a program, Educate for Schools, that helps to develop those skills and to support this capacity building. And some of the things that it includes are, first of all, teacher mindset development and the skills and confidence levels, because without that mindset and confidence, then there won't be that return on investment with the technology that policymakers are introducing into the schools. And there needs to be a real value for teacher professional development and an understanding of what it takes to implement it, and also how long it takes for that to be developed. And once you see that mindset switch, then policymakers will know that they've invested wisely in their capacity, in the capacity development programs. So right now digital competency is limited because there isn't that time for teachers, for educators to design and to really think about how to use that technology. So if policymakers want to break new ground in this area, then I think there needs to be a phased implementation. So first, of course, there needs to be the infrastructure in schools, but then they have to look at the training to start off and to make time for educators to learn and to implement it and to reflect on that. So I think the most successful and transformational change that I've seen have looked at best practice development as well. So, and they've had the chance to look at what are the new teaching approaches that go with these new technologies as well, and been able to have the time to think about and reflect on how that's worked in their system and in their context, and honestly given time to do some action-based research. And also, and you know, I'm sure this is something that we'll talk about later in this panel, is the evidence base that comes with the choosing of that technology. So teachers are given tech that is, or allowed to, or empowered to choose technology that comes with an evidence-based approach of how to implement it. And then they're given time and space and the knowledge of how to use it, and to use evidence to continuously see if that product is working, and basically implement it better and better every time and reflect. And which goes back to the partnerships that we were talking about previously, which I couldn't agree more with, is that need for the partnerships to help with that implementation. But above all, when we're developing these skills in teachers, we can't ask them to do that as well as everything else that they're doing. We need to give them a bit of time and space to be able to implement and learn these new skills, and also have a chance to test new pedagogies and approaches to learning for it to be engaging for students as well, not to use traditional means with these new tools. So it's quite a holistic approach, I think, to develop capacity.
Absolutely, and you've set out some of those challenges really well. Basil, do you have anything to add to that around some of those biggest challenges when it comes to large-scale national reform programs for technology?
Yeah, I've been involved in several, national-wide rollouts of edtech technology rollouts, and everything Anissa said, 100%. You mentioned capacity building and training, and I'd just like to add one small thing. A lot of times we see training as an afterthought. We see the majority of the discussion pre-rollout, talking about objectives and stakeholders and executive buy-in. And then training comes in, oh yeah, we'll do that. My experience has always been, if you flip that dynamic around and start with training and capacity building, your chances of success are exponentially increased. So that's on the training side. On the other side, I'd like to make a comment on infrastructure, which also Anissa mentioned, because a lot of times before COVID, for example, executives and decision makers would listen to the naysayers. Oh, we don't have bandwidth. Oh, the students don't have devices. Oh, they won't know how to use the technology. And then projects are stopped very early on. But when COVID hit, there was no choice. There was no, we didn't have that opportunity to listen to the naysayers, and we had to go. And it was really surprising to see how quickly the dynamics shifted. The users were a lot more accepting with time. People that didn't have the device or didn't have the bandwidth, they sorted themselves out. They didn't have the space, they found the space. Teachers that didn't have Wi-Fi, they got 5G. So all of a sudden, it works. So my recommendation is, we need to build an MVP, just a minimum viable product, roll it out, test it out, iterate, and you will see success a lot faster than if you spend so much time on demos and proof of concepts and workshops and discussions versus just going out there and doing something.
Yeah, there's no such thing as the perfect conditions, are there? You sometimes just have to get on and see what you can do. Thank you very much, both of you, for that. My next question, Zubair, I'm going to put to you first. When planning to invest in new technologies, what do you think ministries of education should consider as part of their evaluation and decision-making process?
Great question. And I think it takes, I'm going to just steal one of Anissa's points, which is firstly, the evidence that the technology works. And it is absolutely critical if we're going to take something to a national level that whatever tool, whatever startup, whatever software it is, has been stress tested and actually very, very rigorously assessed that that form of technology is actually making a positive outcome, and not just a positive outcome, but a maximal positive outcome. I mean, we're optimizing for this learning outcome that we would like to see. And I want to just kind of like just iterate on this point because it's so important to me, because we look at any other thing, we look at the pandemic, for example, and we look at how scientific and rigorous we've had to be about all these nuances, and we've had to learn it, right? We've had to learn these the differences between different vaccines. We've had to learn about the R rates, and these things have been pushed to us, and we accept it because yes, we do need to know all these skills and all these little nuances to make our right decisions. But unfortunately, when we consider education, it isn't given that level of rigorous and scientific assessment. And I think that is now critical for us when we take these tools that are coming out to actually be implemented. We need to be as critical as we are about what we're going to put into our body, because consider that these 10, 11-year-olds, these 6, 7-year-olds, these 14, 15-year-olds are going to be the next people running this world. What we're giving them, essentially not as injections, but as kind of the food or the knowledge that's coming through their devices, is going to critically affect how they end up. So I think, first of all, we need to be taking a much more scientific approach when it comes to deciding on which tools to choose. And then now wearing my other hat of Z-Notes and talking about social impact and accessibility. So once again, I want to bring that point about sometimes tools and technologies are able to target only a certain group of people, and we may not have enough localized knowledge of what challenges are being faced in the smallest and most impoverished communities. And I think it's the duty of any government to be making sure that their highest and most affluent group of people or society is as well taken care of as their least, if not more, I would say. And we need to make sure that these technologies and tools are actually accessible to those people at the most difficult situations in life. Basil mentioned the kind of challenges in digital divides and internet accessibility. These are critical things that we need to assess, and we need to make sure that this is going to be available. We talk about AI and how incredible it is. Okay, but it requires oftentimes a very high-powered telephone or mobile phone to be used, or it requires a very fast internet connection to be connecting to servers to get that data or feedback. Are we building these considerations? Are these part of our design constraints when we're taking tools from policies or ideas to actually implementations? And I think those are my critical questions I would put forward if I was taking a decision on how to proceed.
Thanks, Zubair. And Anissa, I saw you nodding a lot during that. It sounds like you've got something to add as well.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with Zubair. He knew that I would 100% agree with him. It's all about evidence. So when choosing the right tools, actually, Educate's logo is this golden triangle, which it comes back to what Basil was saying as well. The golden triangle for us is the three major stakeholders in edtech development. So it's the developers of the technologies is one point. Then we have the researchers on the other point, and then the third one is education and educators. And we say that it doesn't become golden, and the gold is evidence, and you don't actually know if something works. You don't have that proof unless these three are together. So you can work as much as you want as a developer, and you can bring as many experts as you like, but if you don't work with the users of the technology and understand their context, it's not going to work. And like Zubair said, in every context, in all different contexts around the world, and you have to check and make sure, and you have to have that evidence and make time and space for that. So it's a whole different way of looking at and mindset now with the procurement of technologies and tools for learning. It's all about making sure that you bring these three together and get that the evidence that you need and that gold in the triangle. And so some of the things that we're working on, obviously we have Educate started with an accelerator that builds research capacity and a research mindset in developers of educational technology. So to date, we've supported 300 edtech startups, small to medium-sized businesses, to develop a research mindset and to see how they can put research into their business development process, how they can work and learn these skills that academics have, and to collaborate with academia, but as well to embed that into their business and the dynamic edtech startup environment. So how does research work in that environment? And that's what Educate's all about, and encouraging startups to then do those pilots and to have evidence before they make any claims about their tools. And then from the other side, it's really important that procurement has a similar setup where they develop a research mindset and to make those decisions. And so with my research was all about, I built a framework called the Evidence Informed Learning Technology Enterprise, which basically is what's a great edtech company, and an edtech company that's built on evidence. And with my other hat on, with my as a Gold Star founder of this company, basically what I did was turn that into a tool that can quickly value the impact potential of edtech companies. So companies can come on, get a score, and then procurers can see how trustworthy they are as far as how much evidence there is in the fold of their business. And also companies can see and get a quick report on what they can do in order to be more evidence informed. And so it's based on these 6 dimensions, which I call the 6 superpowers of edtech companies. And essentially they'll get a score on each of the 6. They'll see what they're missing, and it's all about capacity development. So there are there's so many programs and support around for everyone, all the stakeholders in the triangle, for businesses to build with evidence, for those choosing them and policymakers to choose with and be empowered with tools that can gauge their impact potential with their evidence. But really it all comes back to that, is making sure that they come together. Like everyone in the panel, we agree so much on this. It's not possible to build great edtech and to choose great edtech without this collaboration, and to make sure that there's proof of it working. So that's.
I love that golden. It doesn't turn golden without the evidence. It's fantastic. So Basil, I'm going to give the last word to you on this. What are your thoughts on what ministers of education need to consider in their decision making?
Thanks, Jane, for the opportunity. Whilst I agree with everything Anissa and Zubair said, the importance of, evidence-based approach and doing our homework to make sure that the successful rollout of the edtech is there. I have a bit more of a bias for action. I think a lot of times ministries of education and policymakers get stuck in this paralysis by analysis, and this can potentially be the reason why we see such huge gaps in OECD scores versus investments, where we see huge gaps between the developed world and the developing world. I think a lot more can be done. Education as a whole globally can transform a lot faster, can take advantage a lot more of the technologies that are available out there. And potentially, if we can just push for a bit more action and a bit less analysis, we can I think get results faster.
Thank you. Any of our panelists want to come back on that before we close?
Yes, I just think that it's really important to have a marriage of the information and the evidence with action. And so at Educate, we're big proponents of a lean approach. So as you are releasing your products, to start with your MVP, but then to continuously collect data and evidence of what's working. And so it's really important to have action, but not to forget that evidence is very important at every step, because in education, you have a responsibility to your learner who is vulnerable to the decisions that we're making for them. And so it's irresponsible for us not to look at the evidence continuously, but it's important to develop an edtech research mindset, which is what Educate helps with, is this balance between researchers' techniques, but the speed at which you need to do it as in the business world and in the startup. And you need to be dynamic in the way that you're doing it. And so that's something that we definitely need to work on moving forward. And yes, thank you so much for having me, Jane.
Well, if this has been a little glimpse of what the dialogue at the RewirEd conference in December is going to be like, then I'm looking forward to it even more than ever. So thank you, Zubair, Basil and Anissa for such an interesting and enjoyable conversation. And I look forward to continuing the dialogue. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.